So thank you everyone for joining us for our third speaker series event presented by the UN Pre-PT Society. Today our guest is Jill, and she's doing her dual degree at McMaster, and she's going to tell you a bit about her experiences in the program and a bit about herself. So thank you for joining us today, and I'll have you take over.
Thanks for the introduction. So just as a kind of preface to all of this, what I'd love is for this to very much be like an open conversation. So like, thanks for everybody for hopping on and thinking that I'm cool enough to talk to you. So if you have questions throughout, please just let's ask them away. Because I have a tendency to ramble. So stop me if there's a question and we'll answer it and kind of go. I'm in a different stream than some of the other people that you talk to, from what I understand. So please feel free to do that. So my name's Jill. I was at Windsor from 2012 to 2017. Loved my time there. No regrets. Was a varsity athlete during my time there as well. So I was a weight thrower for the track and field team. During my time at Windsor, I had the opportunity to volunteer with a lot of the different organizations, and I highly recommend doing that. So one of the organizations was the Chronic Disease Management Program through the Windsor Essex Health Unit, and they were really great about exposing me to different ways that physios could be utilized within the community. So up until that point, I had often, my experience was in private practice, so working with, mostly treating my own injuries as an athlete. But in the Windsor Essex Health Unit, it was more publicly funded, or at least subsidized. And you got to see people at different stages of chronic disease management, and you got to see a really diverse profile of individuals. So I believe they're always looking for volunteers, so I highly recommend it. If Donna is still there, she is amazing. And they believe they moved just down the street from the HQ building, so it's actually very accessible. But that volunteer experience was definitely foundational in terms of helping to build my CV and my application to physiotherapy school. During my time at Windsor, I actually started the co-op program and then discovered it was not quite the right fit for me. At the time, it was pretty new. And so there just wasn't the types of placements that I wanted to see. But I did go through one semester of it. So I actually worked at a chiropractic office, Radovich Chiropractic. And I continued to work there after my co-op placement was done, because it was good to again have that clinical exposure, get some hands-on experience. And Rads is great as a teacher and a mentor as well. As you guys know, Windsor provides lots of diverse courses, and I definitely took full advantage of that. So I was in the movement science stream. When I was there was 3 streams still, so you could do sports studies, movement science, or sport management. So the anatomy and physiology, key for sure. I was talking to Simona, and I guess you guys have the option now for a second anatomy, and I think that's great and highly recommend taking it, because the one thing I have noticed being at school is the anatomy stuff goes very quickly. So if you can provide yourself with that opportunity to kind of really get a good handle on it before you come, you're going to be setting yourself up for success. I also minored in psychology, which actually turned into my love for research, which I didn't really know until I had registered in a class. It was called Aging in Older Adults. I had loved working with the Chronic Disease Management Program, which was primarily older adults at the time. And so I thought, okay, well, let's see what this course is like. And it was really independent in terms of the workload. And we got to kind of research an area of study. And I was surprised at how invested I got into it. And so through that, I connected with Dr. Paula Van Wyk, who I believe is still there. And she looked at me and said, I think that you might enjoy this a lot more. So let's get you in an independent study so you can see what this would be like if you were to kind of do some more research. And that was the best advice I got during my time in Windsor. I am a student who has done well, but I was not the student who had 90s throughout her entire degree. I definitely had a 60 on my transcript, and I'm still here. So just as I always tell people that, because I think a lot of times people think you have to be top of your class to kind of be able to achieve your goals. You can make mistakes and learn from them and continue to build on. So that's important for me to kind of communicate through. So once I got a chance to work with Paula, I got to go through the process of understanding what would be entailed in a research study. My understanding is you guys now have the option to actually do a thesis. Highly recommend it. Especially within the practice of physiotherapy. It's such an evidence-based practice. That's how we teach it in Canada. that understanding the research process and starting to get a handle on how to read research, understand it, what the advantages and disadvantages, but also the limitations in research, I think will only build your ability to succeed in physiotherapy school. And that's definitely something I have noticed during my time now at Mac. I applied to physiotherapy school straight out of Windsor and didn't get in the first time. The independent study with Paula opened up doors, though, for me to be able to apply for a thesis-based master's. And from there, I went on to the University of Waterloo. Paula connected me with a professor named Dr. Stoley, Dr. Paul Stoley at Waterloo. He's in the School of Public Health and Health Systems. And they had collaborated on a few projects together. Paula kind of knew my personality, knew Paul's, and thought, this I think will be a good fit. So I met with Paul and worked with him for 2 years. Again, it was a great kind of way to explore the other areas of interest that I discovered I had. I always had the intention of applying back to physio school. That was always the end goal for me. But the more I got into research, the more I realized I actually really liked it. And I did not think that was going to be the case. I did not think that research was something I was going to enjoy this much. And so this is where I credit Paula a lot with opening my eyes and opening those doors for me. So my master's thesis was 2 years long. There's courses that you take. It's pretty typical. So coursework for the first year, you develop and work on your thesis proposal, do data collection, defend at the end, and then you kind of go, now what? So applications process is very much the same coming out of a master's versus a undergrad. I will say at the time, and I don't know if this has changed because it's been a few years now, my master's wasn't recognized by Western, but it was recognized by Mac and it was recognized by Queen's, and I wasn't sure if it was actually recognized by U of T or not. So there's, some advantages and disadvantages to that compared to, going back and maybe upgrading some of the courses to show that I was, committed to my education, being successful at physio. My thesis project actually looked at frailty screening tools. So it was a lot of measurement based in its focus and kind of understanding what we were measuring when we were talking about the concept of frailty. Turned out to be really great also for physio school, because when we're in physio school, a lot of what we talk about is kind of what measures or what tests are going to be helpful to, rule in or rule out certain types of conditions and diseases. And so having a handle on those concepts actually has been really helpful for me while I'm in classes now. I applied to straight physiotherapy, but partway through my degree, like towards the end of it, discovered that there was a dual degree option at McMaster and Western within Ontario. It also exists out in BC at UBC, and I believe it also exists in U of A in Alberta. So what the dual degree option is it's a 5-year program. You get your PhD and you get your clinical skills. So I will have a physiotherapy degree and I'll also have my PhD at the end of this 5 years. And to me, that was the opportunity then to combine the best of both worlds. So I could continue on with the research that it turns out I really liked, but I could also still kind of achieve that goal of becoming a physiotherapist and being able to make, real change at the client level as well. So it's definitely a very difficult program. I think you have to really be sure you like research to be able to do it, because it's also very fast paced. I personally 100% recommend having a master's behind you or having a solid understanding through like a thesis, an undergrad thesis project, because everything is accelerated. That being said, you can actually apply to it straight out of undergrad. So if that's something that interests you and you've had the opportunity to be exposed to research, definitely look into it, and start having those conversations with thesis supervisors earlier rather than later, because I think that really does make or break your situation. The longer I've been in academia, the more that idea of mentorship is really important. And so you're with this person, especially in the dual degree, you're with this person for 5 years. So make sure that you're going to be able to get along. So I've been really lucky with all of my supervisors and have had good responsibilities with all of them. So here I am now. I'm in the dual degree. I'm in the 3rd year of it. So the first 2 years of the dual degree are strictly PhD. So I do PhD level coursework. A lot of it, unsurprisingly, I'm sure, is focused on methodology and research design, which gets a lot more interesting when you get an opportunity to apply it right away. And then the 2nd year is something called your comprehensive exams. So in your comprehensive exams, it's a little different at McMaster compared to some other institutions. And there are kind of institutional differences no matter where you go. But at Mac, what we do is we write a grant and that can be related to what our thesis project is going to be on. And then we also have to complete a scholarly paper, but that scholarly paper is in an area outside our expertise. And that paper is basically, it's like a thesis project, like a smaller one. So it's a one page, like a one project article that would be publishable in an academic journal. So I successfully defended those at the end of July or end of June, which meant that I was then able to move into the clinical years of my program now. So I am almost done my first unit of physiotherapy school, which has been quite the whirlwind. In the dual degree, I am expected to continue on with my thesis project while I'm in physio. So I don't have to take the research class in physiotherapy school, but so that time is then dedicated to kind of completing some of my research studies. So my thesis right now is focused on virtual rehab, and I'm working with, collaborating with an organization called GLAD Canada, and I'm evaluating their virtual program. So when COVID hit, it's an osteoarthritis program, I should probably say that. When COVID hit, I had to kind of rethink what my thesis was, as did many graduate students, and what was going to be possible in the timelines of my PhD and the clinical years. And we were pretty sure that being back in clinic within a 4-month span was probably not going to be possible. So we made the switch. GLAD moved virtually, also because of COVID, because osteoarthritis still needs to be managed and sedentary behavior is not going to help that. And so when they made the switch to virtual, I saw an opportunity maybe to collaborate with them and see how that was going to go, and is that something that can be sustained. I see it as an opportunity to reach more people, especially because we know that in rural and remote areas, the number of healthcare providers that are there is not necessarily going to have the skill set to be able to address those more chronic disease management kind of needs. So I'm starting that. I'm working on a scoping review, and I'm working on some qualitative data. I am primarily a qualitative researcher, although I am also going to be evaluating a database at the end of my thesis. So also honing in on those quantitative skills. And that was something else I wanted to talk about, was that research doesn't necessarily mean you're sitting at a lab bench. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do really heavy stats. That's not me. That's not my strength. My strength has always been talking to people. So in the lab, Simona and I were talking about the lab that you guys take at in HK. There's the opportunity in the psych lab to actually do some interviewing, transcribing, and kind of initial theming. And that was my introduction to qualitative research. And it just made sense to me, like the way that the world worked and how that kind of worked in research really resonated with me. Whereas like one of my best friends, quantitative is his thing. Like he does really complex statistics and has to really dumb it down when he talks to me. I think the other thing I wanted to make sure I brought forward about the application process was that a lot of it is just determination and kind of, perseverance in that regard. And especially for the dual degree program and getting through the dual degree program, there are lots of smart people in the world, but the people who end up getting their PhDs are often the ones who have the perseverance to be able to get through it, because it is hard. So I can talk a little bit more about Mac, but does anybody have any questions about kind of how I got up to this point at this point?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, you kind of talked a little bit about going from like research then into like clinical like classes sort of thing. Do you find that transition difficult at all, or is it just kind of?
Yeah, it's definitely different, especially with my class. Like kind of it's interesting kind of compare myself to my classmates in that regard. We had an assignment, for example, it was called the scholarly paper. It was 3 pages, and I struggled with it because how I view a scholarly paper now is very different than what they're asking for. And we had to incorporate an interview with, a healthcare provider, and I struggled with it because for me that felt like qualitative research, but you can't do qualitative research in 3 pages. So it is that sense that is a little bit difficult, but actually I think in most of the time it actually is something that has really helped me. And I'm very strong at at Mac. We do problem-based learning. So we have these tutorials, these seminars where we go out, we do research independently on our own. We come back and we talk about it as a group. And I feel like my research skills in that regard have actually streamlined that process, and I'm much faster than I would have been if I had not done a kind of a research-based master's beforehand.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. That's been the feedback I've gotten from some of my professors as well, is that, I'm able to kind of identify some of that literature, that evidence base, applied to our case studies, just in a different way. I have colleagues and peers in the PT program that are very good at clinical reasoning because of the experiences they've had. And so you have an opportunity to really learn from one another in that sense.
Okay, so it serves you a lot then in your class.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the more opportunity you have to kind of figure out what's out there, and I think I can evaluate things really a lot more quickly because that's what I've been taught for the last 4 years. Is this article going to be good and actually going to contribute to this case study, or is this something that maybe you should question? There's a couple of red flags about that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Great. Any other questions? I can talk a little bit more about kind of the MAC process after this too. All right. So at MAC's a little bit different in a few ways. So it is based on a problem-based learning focus. And so what that means is I actually only have, I think it's only 4 classes. So PBT is what we call problem-based seminar or problem-based tutorial. Those are small group seminars. So I have a group of 6 people. We're presented with a healthcare problem and we read sections of the healthcare problem and then develop learning objectives based on what the information we've been provided. So for example, at the start, we talk about like, what is health? Because that's pretty important to understand if you're going to go into a healthcare field. You go out, you research kind of what is it out there. So like, for example, looking at things like the World Health Organization, how do they define health? What is the role of a PT in that situation? We come back as a group, we talk about what we found, similarities, dissimilarities, things that we disagreed on. And our tutor is there kind of make sure that we stay on track. So it's very much case-based. You develop your own LOs. They do have like LOs that you have to get. And if for whatever reason your group at the time has gone off on a rabbit hole and you haven't gotten one of, your tutor will come back and be like, you should also look at this. Please search this. Please research this topic as well. So they do make sure that you're going to learn what you need to learn. And then part of PBT, they bring our whole class together. So I think at MAC right now we have about 68. They bring our whole class together and we do a large group seminar to kind of introduce the case each time. And we go through what they call PPENDers. So it's like prognosis, physiology, epidemiology, etology, risks, signs, symptoms, all of that stuff, so that you kind of start to understand whatever it is, disease that's being presented in that case. Then we also have a PT practice course, which really is about kind of the roles and scope of PT, different ways that it can be used within different type of healthcare systems, but it also goes into the policy. What is consent? How do you make sure you're taking consent? What are your record keeping standards? So the practical side of it, we have our clinical lab course, which is our hands-on skills-based course. So we're in CL twice a week in person through COVID as well. The first part of CL for the first half of your first unit feels like it's just everything's being thrown at you, but it really builds. And the way that it works at MAC is it's spiral curriculum. And so they introduce everything to you, and then you're going to come back and revisit it, and you're going to get more comfortable every time you go through it. And they introduce kind of new details every time you go through. So for example, gait. I know you guys talk about gait in one of your labs. I think it's the ergo lab. And there's a lot actually going on with gait. But when we talk about gait the first time, which is like our second lecture of CL, brand new physio student, second lecture of CL, we go through gait, but they're like, just know these are the phases. That's all you need to know. Perfect. Now we're going into gait again this week, and we're talking about like, okay, so now what is abnormal gait? How do you observe that? How would you measure that? What types of joint angle differences are there if you notice this gait, X gait versus Y gait? So you start to build on those concepts and learn from them every time, which for me is very helpful because it's like the more often that I see it, then better it is for my memory. And then part of it, CL also includes anatomy. And this is where I was talking to Simona as well, like that second anatomy course I think is so golden for you guys. It is evaluated as part of CL, but we have the opportunity at MAC to also be in the cadaver lab. Right now we're in the cadaver lab once a month. It's the first Monday of every month, but I believe when in normal times that's a little different, but don't quote me on it just in case. But it's great because they also have open lab times, and so you can go in and like practice, and there's something about seeing that specimen and being able to see the origins and the insertions, and you can see the nerves going into the muscles that really help to kind of solidify and consolidate the knowledge that you're learning in CL and understand why it is you're doing certain types of tests and stuff like that. So it's, highly recommend taking as many anatomy courses as you can because it all is gone through very quickly when you're in PT. Sorry, my dog just got home. She's probably going to jump up here. So, Shh. Hi, sweetie. Off you get. Any questions about that?
I did like this was a while ago, kind of
Mhm.
before I even got into HK. Like I'm in my fourth year now.
Right.
But I did like a little tour at like Western, whatever, and they said that they had a couple streams. They obviously, so they like traditionally, I'm sure most of the time it's all cadaver labs, but they also said they had this like VR thing that they use. Do
Yeah.
you have any experience with that at all? I'm just curious.
It's a little bit different at every institution, I imagine, but we have access to something called Mac Anatomy, and it is like a whole online like modules. They have both like they have radiographs that you can read as well, because we are actually getting tested on some of that as well as like 3D images that can shift around. So Mac does provide free access to that. Super helpful as well, because I think that the more times you can see things and interact, I think the better it is. Our anatomy profs at Mac are phenomenal. I'm sure everybody says that. They just, they're so knowledgeable. It's like Dave Andrews, right? It's great because they're so knowledgeable. They love the content. They're great teachers. And so you kind of come back to, that's exactly what it is when you get here as well. And that's, helpful. That's the other thing with the PBT tutors as well, is a lot of the PBT tutors are actually out working in healthcare. So they're not profs. They're here as tutors. And so you get an opportunity to ask them kind of like clinical scenario questions in a way that you maybe don't have access to if you're only dealing with profs whose primary role is research, which is great. Obviously, I'm an advocate for research. I love research. I'm doing my PhD. But there's something about being able to talk and kind of bounce things off, both formally and informally during PBT tutors or PBT sessions about kind of what their experience is in clinic. Like, how often do you see this? Is this something, how would you do this? Like, what is your interpretation of this? And they're still practicing, which is really valuable, I find. Any other questions? I think if there's anything else I can talk about. Yeah, the reassurance, like, obviously you have to have high grades, but when I applied the first time to Mac especially, they used to only take the top 300 grades that got an interview. Now everybody above a 70, I believe, gets an interview. So those other things that make good physiotherapists are really important. And so making sure that you kind of give yourself the opportunity to develop those skills, I think are helpful. I did take the Casper the second time I applied. That's a strange experience, but I think that's where, when you've had the opportunity to kind of develop those people skills in particular, and your communication skills, that's where you kind of get an opportunity to shine.
One other thing I kind of wanted to ask you. So I know, so you're in the dual degree physio and PhD. So when you graduate, you'll have a PhD in physio, right?
I'll have a PhD in rehabilitation science, and then I'll have a master's in physiotherapy as well.
Okay, so what's kind of like the end goal for you? So do you want to work as a PT, or do you want to stay in research for PT? Like,
I want to do it all, which I know is like a complicated answer, but that was part of what attracted me to it, is that there are now more roles that are emerging for healthcare providers to engage in research, but also engage and be client-facing as well. There's a lot of things I would like to do, and I think that it'll happen at different stages of my career. One of the advantages of applying to the dual degree is you also have opportunities for funding and other kind of experiential learning that you don't necessarily get if you're doing the straight clinical program, or it's harder, because to be honest, like, the time commitment during that 2 years is high. So seeking out those other opportunities is, I don't think I would be able to do it personally. I know peers who are capable of doing it. I just take a little more time to study, maybe, I don't know. But so one of the things that I've actually been able to do is, right now at Mac, there's a scholarship called the Wilson Scholarship. And so that scholarship particularly is a leadership-based scholarship. You have the opportunity to identify and meet with mentors in various career paths. And you have the opportunity to engage in different types of experiential learning that you wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise. And there's funding to support that. So I'm trying to identify mentors now. So I'm going to speak with someone who works at the hospital. She's PT, but she also does research. So she develops a research program for a specific patient subset, and does basically what it sounds like to me, and I'm going to talk to them more about this, but it does like quality improvement. And are we measuring what we need to measure? What can we change about this program? How can we make more improvements for that patient population? And that would be like ideal for me. I would love that. But I also have a bit of an interest after being in the public health stream, which definitely changed my perspective on like some of the policy standpoints. And I think that being able to engage in client-facing like PT practice and then provide like a consultation role to like Ministry of Health or public health in your city even gives you a very unique perspective that you get to bring on. And you can advocate for your patients, which is like one of the core competencies of PT. You can advocate in a way that I think you maybe don't have the skill set for before. I don't know. So I want to do everything. It does. I feel like it opens any door I want at this point. I will have a lot of, education behind me to be able to support whatever it is I decide I want to do.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because I find physio like an interesting job, because I feel like kind of once you go through school, like there's so many different branches and so many different streams you can go into. So just exposing yourself to so many different areas, it's only going to help, right?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, like the placement, so I'm starting my first placement in January, and there are more role emerging placements that are becoming available as well. And so some of those placements actually incorporate research within them. And so even if you're not in the dual stream, you have an opportunity to kind of engage in that in some ways if you're, lucky enough to get one of those placements. But you also have 20 years ago, PTs and family health teams was not something that was heard about the same way. But there are several placements within family health teams for me. And you get to understand, I think, until you really are here, you've had the opportunity to talk to someone who's outside of private practice. You don't realize all the different streams you can go into and all the different subspecialties that exist as well. So you can now be like an advanced practice physio, and there's now CPA has designated like specialists. You can go through like a whole program for that as well. And that aspect of like continuing education in that regard, I think, is really interesting.
So I have a quick question. So McMaster's application process requires the Cure Talent interview.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you can speak a little about that and how that interview is run, and maybe some tips on how to prepare for it, or something like that. Yeah.
So it's very similar to the Casper in terms of like what it is there to evaluate is not necessarily like, it's not there to evaluate your grades. They have that part of your application. I found, to be fair, it's been a couple of years since, it's been 2.5 years since I took it, so bear with me. But there is also, some scenario questions, like how would you deal with different scenarios? If you look at McMaster developed the it's called the MMI, it's like multi-minute scenarios, or I can't remember what it stands for, acronyms, but if you look at some of the research on that, they actually talk about what types of scenarios they ask about, and that's, to me, is it's like clinical reasoning skills. They want to see what your clinical reasoning skills are at, and also kind of your decision-making process, which go hand in hand. So it is very similar to the Casper. If you've done any reading on that, it's basically a max version of Casper. But they have faculty review it, I believe, as opposed to like the standardized people behind Casper who does it like worldwide or whatever it is.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that.
I will say, like, I know Casper, you can like pay for prep classes. I personally don't think they're worth the money. Casper, don't come after me. This is on YouTube, but you can always prepare for things. It's like preparing for a job interview. And I would recommend using the Student Success Office in that case. So go and practice taking an interview with someone at the Student Success Office, because it's basically it's very similar. You want to be able to let your personality and your like skills come through. And part of that is just half of that is how you present yourself. And the other half of that is thinking about what types of questions you think they're going to ask. Why do you want to be a PT? It's an easy one, right? Think about what that is, but go beyond the like, well, I want to help people. Everybody wants to help people if you're applying to this program. If you don't want to help people in this program, then I feel like you're probably in the wrong career path. But think about some of the deeper reasons about why this is what you want to do. If you are applying to the dual degree option, you don't do Kira. You actually have a panel interview. So it's a mix between, there's usually 3 or 4 people who you go into a room, there's 4 people in front of you, and they sit there and they ask you questions. You do have an opportunity to ask questions back. I highly recommend always having questions prepared. And then you have an opportunity to kind of showcase and kind of take the conversation in different directions as well.
So what would some of those questions be that you'd ask back, for example?
I always like to ask about what types of supports are given to students who are in the program. I like to ask about how they receive feedback because I think feedback, especially at Mac at the time, the dual degree is pretty new. It's only 4 years old at Mac. So we haven't even graduated someone from the dual degree stream at McMaster. Western's dual degree program has been around for a lot longer, so has UBC's and so has U of A's. But the feedback loop is still really important because things have to be adjusted. And I think we've seen that after COVID as well. You have to be able to adjust things. So asking about feedback is important. And also ask about what their current students say about the program. I like that one as well, because I think that tells you about like student culture. And it's valuable information for you to hear. Student culture is a big one. You know, are people happy? Do they stick around? I think if you're in a dual degree stream, inherently asking about funding is important as well, and what opportunities for external funding exist, because there are lots. You just have to know that they exist, right? And do that at Windsor now. Like when I was at Windsor, I won a men's basketball scholarship 3 years in a row because nobody else applied to it. You know, so it's like that's my claim to fame at Windsor. And it looks really good on a CV as well if you have that opportunity. I was very lucky to get a decent amount of funding through my master's. I won a fellowship. I found out about the fellowship 2 weeks before that application was due, and I didn't have a thesis yet. But take the challenge and run with it, right? So my advisor was great. We sat down, we figured out a project, you put in the work, you get it done, and then suddenly you have funding for the duration of your master's thesis, right? And same thing applies when you're in grad school. And in physio school, you do have the opportunity to apply for, I think it's called a OGS, it's like Ontario Graduate Scholarships. You can actually apply for it. And having things like research on your CV, even if you're like a research assistant with one of the profs at Windsor, does actually really set you aside because a lot of people don't have that type of experience. But when you're in an evidence-based practice profession, I think it's very helpful.
That's interesting. So I'm in the undergraduate thesis class right now.
Okay.
And I had my proposal presentation this morning.
How did that go?
It was a little, I mean, it went okay, I would say. The questions at the end, my prof tried to ask me the hardest questions ever. I think I did okay answering them, but it was a little stressful towards the end, but overall it feels nice to kind of have that experience.
Yeah.
Do you think that sort of experience also helps you in like an interview process kind of?
100%. I think when you've gone through that kind of process where you're sitting at like, is it the same? I don't know if it's the same for undergrad thesis, but like in a master's, I do my presentations 20 minutes and then I sit and answer questions for 2 hours. And if you've gone through that process, like the Curie interview feels like nothing after that, right? Because you're like, I can answer questions. And as you prepare for that type of questioning, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or whatever, you start to develop your cognitive abilities get more refined. So you hear the question, you interpret it, and you learn how to develop a more like fluid answer coming out because you practice answering questions for that. And I think the more times you practice answering questions, the better it is. That's why I like going to like things like the Student Success Office. Use the resources on campus. They're there for you to utilize, and I think they're often underutilized. For example, at Waterloo, I loved the Writing Center because sometimes you just need to talk to someone who has no idea what you're doing, and if you can explain it to them in a coherent way, you're going to be fine. Yeah, so 100% super valuable experience.
Yeah. I mean, those kind of like student success things. I think they have a couple on like interview practice, and then I think what you're referring to is like the actual one where you go and have like a practice interview.
Yeah.
So they have like presentations on it, plus like they actually give you that experience. And the writing support desk, like I didn't use the writing support desk till probably like this year in my 4th year, but I'm realizing like, wow, like this is actually so valuable. I should have been using this the whole time.
Why didn't I go sooner?
Right, exactly. So there is a lot of opportunities and extra help, I think, on campus that goes underutilized, but kind of when you realize how valuable it is, like it's definitely a game changer.
I'm a big advocate for it. Like those people are there and they're there to help, right? So make sure that you're setting yourself up for success by using the opportunities that are in front of you. I really like personally being able to network, and I'll cold call. There's a group on Instagram that do really good knowledge translation on Instagram, and I like literally slid into their DMs to ask them if they would be willing to look over one of my projects for physio school, because there are people out there who are experts, and most people are willing to help you. Even if it's just to understand how they got to where they are, or, you know, what's your advice in this situation? How would you handle this? Like, what kind of skills do you think are going to be valuable? And reach out to like people. If they're not able to, they will tell you, and they'll be there. I just don't have the capacity for that right now. They'll let you know. But I think the more you start to understand the different trajectories of the profession, I think the more knowledgeable you come off in those types of interviews as well, and you sound more confident, I think, in your answers. I mean, I'm in the program and I'm still learning about some of the different ones that exist, right? Especially the role emerging ones. So.
Another question I have is, if you could just, I don't know, go through a typical day, maybe just kind of like your routine, what you do, and just so we kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I will say, the transition into PT from like a master's and even like the first couple of years of my PhD, my master's and my PhD was work. So I always thought this is my job. So most of the time it's like an 8-ish hour day. There's always times when it's a little bit longer, and there's always times where there's a bit of a lull and you're kind of wondering what you can do. But I was really big on balance. And so I wanted to make sure that I had balance in my life, which was important to me. And I still think that having other things in your life is important for your sanity. But during PT, I found that I can't hold those boundaries as strict. So a typical day for me right now, I kind of go through my days are a little bit different depending on what classes I have that day. But for example, on Thursdays are a pretty full day. So I get up, we have the opportunity, coffee first always, but we have the opportunity to go into our CL lab early to have like open practice time. Always go early. I always go early because you don't have the opportunity to necessarily have like the table in front of you with some of the like equipment. We're given like a lab toolkit. So we have things like our goniometers, we have our reflex hammers, we have a whole cardio rest thing that I haven't learned. I'm learning that next week. But we have all that other equipment, but there's things like oximeters that we can't take home, obviously. If you have a table that you can actually do all of this on, very few people have that. I'm very lucky. I'm married to a chiropractor, so he has a table at home I can use. But even the opportunity to just practice on peers. So I get up, I'm at campus for about 8 o'clock. We have an hour lab for open practice. My lab then is 2.5 hours long. Within lab, there's usually 3 stations that they go through, and the profs right now rotate. Sometimes it's the students that rotate. COVID has changed a little bit of that. It's all kind of relating to a common theme for that lab. So for example, goniometry was like one of the first things we learned, which is measurement of the different angles of the joints in the body. So we went through upper limb, we went through trunk and spine, and then we went through lower limb in the 3 sections of that lab. So that ends at about 11:30. Food and more coffee usually is next. And then I usually have about an hour before I have to go into my PPT tutorial, which then is 2 hours long. So that hour for me, I like to kind of decompress a little bit because you just have done a lot of thinking for a long time, and there's a little bit of like it needs to sink in. So my PVT group usually kind of hangs out for a little bit, grab some lunch, and then we start to kind of review what we've talked about or what we're going to talk about for our PVT session again. Go through the PVT tutorial. So it's 1 to 3 on Thursdays for me. I then bus home because again, like I kind of just need like a little bit of a brain break. Walk the dog because I have a dog. And then dinner, and then I do find that I usually study for a couple hours in the evening as well. I try, and this is more of like a me thing, like I'm not someone who can study until 10 o'clock and then go to bed for 11. Like my brain needs to like decompress and shut down. So for me, working in some of those like self-care techniques is really important. So whether that's like I do a little bit of exercise or like moss on the couch for a little bit, or take the dog for another walk, whatever it is, do that before kind of being able to wind down, and then again up. Where I'm located in downtown Hamilton, it's like a 25-minute bus ride for me to get to campus, which is not bad. I'm at an age where I didn't want to live with 7 of my closest friends. So, and also I'm married. So we're a little bit farther from campus, but it actually ended up being very helpful for placements because I'm in like the core of the downtown transportation, which is eons better than it is in Windsor. I can tell you that. So so I can get most of the placements I can get to in 20 minutes. Whereas if you're actually down like right next to Mac, where you're walking distance to Mac, that placement's probably an hour away. So it turned out to be quite a nice thing actually. And you're kind of close to some of the cool spots in Hamilton as well. Hamilton gets a bit of a bad rep, but there's some really nice spots. They're very similar to Windsor. Just got to know where to go. So that's probably about a typical day for me.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, and it's nice that it worked out that you're closer to the placements that way. So
yeah, lucked out that way.
Yeah.
I will say too, the other thing is that because PBT is so independent focused, that's the other thing that the research really helped me with, is that I learned how to do that independent learning, which is why I also think doing something like an undergrad thesis or an undergrad independent project really sets you up for success, because it feels very overwhelming if you haven't had that opportunity before. Because otherwise, like, for example, on Monday, I have one class, that's it. And you're kind of like, what do I do with the rest of my day? You do the PBT because it's going to take you a couple hours to get through. But until you figure out that routine, it's like a little bit hard, you know?
That's routine, I think, in anything you take is so important and sets you up for success, really. So it's good to know that. And I guess another question I like to ask all of our presenters in these series is, a lot of us have to write personal statements. So I always ask any tips you have with writing those, or anything to avoid, anything to add, or
yeah, for sure.
Some insight into that. Yeah.
My number one thing is always to not write what you think they want to hear. Because I think a lot of the times it's easy to fall into that trap. Here's what I think they want to hear. Here's what I think is going to get me into the program. Come at it from an honest and open standpoint, and I think that speaks more volumes. In that situation as well, 100% utilize the Writing Center. Like, go talk to them. And I think the more people you can have to review it is also helpful, because I think that the more eyes you have on it, the more refined it gets. And this is probably, like, for me coming out of undergrad, like, that was the first time I was writing a personal statement. And you're like, what do I write? And the more you write it, the more times you do it, the better you get at it. So writing my personal statement now, like when I'm applying for grants, feels like a breeze, because you have things to go off of. But developing that first one can be really hard. I always, like, I believe they have a section on it about, like, why, Mac, why Western, and be genuine about that too, right? Like, each school has different, pros and cons. Everybody does. You get different philosophies to teaching, different approaches to that, right? Like, PBT is very unique to Mac. It's not something that's necessarily implemented at Western and U of T and Queen's. So understand kind of what separates that apart. Make sure you include those differences when you're talking about why that school. You can do that for each of the schools, right? Because at the end of the day, if it's going to achieve your goal, it's going to achieve your goal. But make sure that you're not just kind of doing a generic, like, cookie cutter, writing for that. I think for the personal statements as well, being personal. I know that sounds weird to say, but I think that sometimes you can feel a little bit removed from them. And I think that I think it's really beneficial to communicate what sets you apart. And so that's where, like, having those external experiences or having a really clear understanding about where it is you want to go can be really helpful. I'm not saying you have to know. I've changed my career path like 3 times since entering. My line to get here is not straight. And there was a good chunk of time where I didn't think that was going to happen. So, there's always flexibility in the plan, but it's good to have, an idea of kind of the direction, because I think that comes across when people are reading the applications. So, and reach out to current students too. Like, people want to help. People helped me, so I'm very happy to help others. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. That's great advice. Because I think we get so caught up in thinking, oh, what do they want? What do they want us to write? What's going to look good? When I think they can tell when you're being genuine and when you're trying to really talk about how you feel and that you really want to get into this program just because this is exactly what you enjoy and want to do. So I think that's important to note for sure going into application processes, and even carrying that through towards interviews, I think could be very helpful.
And similarly with references, right? So make sure you start developing those relationships with people early, because that's where, like, I got a really solid reference from Donna at the chronic disease management program, the physiotherapist there, to go into physiotherapy school, because I had developed a relationship with her and had worked with that program for 4 years. So when you have the opportunity, like, to have someone who really knows you in that way. Same with like, so Nate, you have an undergrad thesis supervisor, right? Great opportunity there because you have the opportunity to develop a relationship with a prof in a way that's more than just like a didactic learning situation. So, you know, and be open with them about what your kind of like goals are, because they'll start to think, like if you approach that topic with them earlier, they'll start to like catch things you do and be like, oh yeah, like let's file that away later. You know what I mean? Like Paula writes really, really, really awesome reference letters as well. I know, you know, and she continues to write me reference letters when I ask for funding in my PhD as well. So
that's nice. I've kind of known that, like, noticed that I'm in like volunteering in a clinic right now, and I brought up a couple months ago that I would like kind of hope from the end of it I could get a reference letter from one of the physios there, and now she's kind of almost giving me more opportunities to, okay, hey, can you come in and help me with this or this sort of thing. So I kind of realized that she's thinking about that, so she's kind of also looking for those kind of extra pointers for certain things. So
yeah, exactly, right. And I think though, like being in that kind of situation as well, like your clinical reasoning skills when you go into PBT are going to be strong because you've had that exposure, right? Beyond just like the theory, it's the application of the theory. And even if you haven't learned the theory yet, like seeing how other PTs act in that environment, you'll start to like, it melds in the back of your head. It's always surprising to me how much more I retain than I realize.
Yeah, no, it's definitely valuable. All right. Do we have any other questions from anybody? I don't know how long. Where do we have scheduled till 4:30?
Yeah, 4:30. However long we are, right? Try not to go past the 1 hour, but yeah. Any other questions, or if there's anything you'd like to add, Jill, or
like if you're interested in the dual degree, like feel free to reach out about that specifically as well. Like I think that's it's a fun, unique little thing that I get to do. And that last year of the dual degree then is also to finish writing your thesis. I don't think I actually mentioned that. So you have 2 years PhD, 2 years clinical, and then another year of PhD to bookend it. Doing the dual degree, you also have an extra year to apply to funding, which is kind of nice. So I could apply to funding for my first, second, and third year, whereas most people are only eligible for the first 2. So kind of nice. And I believe we are testing the theory that we can hold PhD level funding because we're dual degree students during our clinical years, which is kind of nice. At Mac, we don't currently have funding through our clinical years, but at Western in the dual degree you do, and I believe at UBC you do as well, but I'll have to double check that. I looked primarily Western and Mac because I wanted to stay in Ontario for the dual degree option because it was 5 years. So.
Okay, that's actually interesting. You can get funding for clinical years if you do the dual. Is that
it's
like
expensive?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Is it difficult to find the funding, or you just like, you seem like you've done a lot to like try and get it, right?
I think you always put your name forward if you can. So there's certain, so at Waterloo, for example, I was guaranteed funding from my supervisor for my 2 years, or for the first year that I was there, and then I applied to the fellowship and got my fellowship for my second year. At Mac, I'm guaranteed a certain amount of funding for the 3 years of my PhD, but I'm not guaranteed any funding during my clinical years. At Western, if you're in the dual degree stream, you're guaranteed a certain amount of funding yearly, even if you're in the dual degree, through your clinical years as well. So it's a little bit different institution, and the amount varies institution to institution. So, you know, I think for especially when you're applying to funding breeds funding. So if you have the opportunity to apply for awards at Windsor right now, like, I think it's always good, even if they don't feel like much. Like $300 is $300 though. That's your anatomy textbook that's sitting beside me right now for PT. You know, and reach out. Like, it's nice. Like when you're in PT too, like at Mac, one of the things that they do really well is that they connect you with a year 2 buddy. So there's always someone you can kind of like bounce ideas and like be like, hey, is this normal to be feeling like this right now? Because like midterms super overwhelming. Is that normal? Yes. Okay, good. Okay. What my year 2 buddy had said to me, and some of the year 2s that I know, is that like they seem to kind of give you a really quick overview of absolutely everything you're going to know in unit 1, because then you go into placement, but then you come back and you revisit it, and so it seems a lot more manageable the further along you get. So the first little bit is kind of like, holy crap, deer in the headlights, what is happening? And then you get a lot more comfortable with the content the more you do it.
So I know you kind of touched upon it before, but what are some reasons that drew you to Mac, other than staying in Ontario, but the program itself. If you can speak a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I liked about Mac was that it was problem-based, and I really was successful at doing that independent learning. That was something I learned about myself. That was something Paula identified in me when I was in Windsor. And so knowing that there is a lot of independent learning at McMaster and that opportunity to ask questions and have these like kind of more abstract conversations as a way of learning, I was like, that's going to be really successful for me. I've always struggled with test taking and kind of that like didactic learning program. That's not my strength, and that's part of the reason why that was something I really worked on. And that's one of the things that I liked about Windsor is that I had several profs pull me aside, be like, let's work on this together. I know that you know this information. Let's figure out how we can make this work for you. And I will always be grateful for that. So the independent learning is the short answer to that question. And then the other thing I liked was the spiral curriculum as well. And then for me in the dual degree program, it really came like supervisors are really important, right? And the type of research I wanted to do, which is probably something that like if you're just going into the straight PT stream is not maybe like on your mind. But if you're thinking about doing research or dual or trying to get involved in research even afterwards, I think that's something important is kind of your access to the types of researchers and clinicians that are there. So my supervisor and I had like lots of things in common. I hadn't had the opportunity to meet her at a conference in my master's, so that was really valuable as well. And that's where like developing those kind of relationships earlier and kind of starting to get a feel for who people are can be really helpful, because you don't necessarily know who someone is after one meeting, but if you have the opportunity to like talk to other students who work in that lab, which I did, always reach out if you're kind of thinking the master's route. Always reach out to current and former students because you get a better sense of how things function and if that's going to be a good fit for you. They can be a great supervisor, but if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, right? So that was definitely another one. And then, for me, Ontario was at this point in my kind of life. My partner and I wanted to be local, and that was also a priority that I was willing to make, so.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting to learn and important to know about, especially when deciding. You have to kind of know how the type of learner you are and know kind of what direction you want to go into before applying and setting your heart out to some of these programs.
And I don't think you can make a bad choice. I really don't.
Right.
I think at the end of the day, whatever's going to help you achieve your goals is going to be beneficial, and you make the best of any situation, right? I like having been through the process where I didn't get in. I always think it's nice to kind of have like, okay, so a backup plan. Not that my master's was a backup plan, and I loved it. Like, I'm so glad I did it. I'm very glad that things turned out the way they did. But it's hard, right? Like, if you don't get in the first time, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get in again, right? So that idea of perseverance and like, it's just a luck. Like sometimes it comes down to luck of the draw is what it feels like, right? So, be open to that. And I had friends who applied, didn't get in, upgraded some marks, applied, and then got in, or went and did their master's, applied and got in. So like, there's always different ways to get into it if it's something you really want to do, right? And only you will know kind of what your threshold is and what's important. I think it's important to also think about like who you want to collaborate with, because I think that also influences kind of the direction you want to go. So like understanding the scope of like OT versus chiro versus physician's assistant, MD, kind of how you work with each of those is important. And you talk about it in PT school, at least for sure at Mac we do. Because a lot of your placements, you'll collaborate with those professions as well. So having an understanding of that, I think, is also really valuable. It was advice that was given to me recently as well, actually.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. All right. Anyone else have any last questions here before we end the session, or any last comments from anyone? Go for it.
I appreciate you guys having a conversation with me. It's nice not to just talk to blank faces on the screen. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. We really appreciated it. We learned a lot. It's really interesting learning about your kind of journey into PT, because it's different from what we've heard about, and it kind of makes us think about other opportunities within PT or other areas we can look into, especially if we enjoy research and kind of want to go through that route. So that was really interesting learning about and kind of getting your thoughts about it. So I think that's all for questions. I don't know if Nate has anything to add.
No, I don't. But I mean, just kind of like same thing. Thank you. Like that's actually very, very useful advice. Like for me especially, like I'm kind of in that point right now where I'm like I'm applying to physio schools, but I'm also enjoying the research that I'm doing. So kind of hearing about your experience and understanding that that is an option, is definitely valuable. So I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you like have any questions about it, one of my colleagues in the dual degree came straight out of undergrad and is doing very well. So like, you know, it is something you can apply to straight out of undergrad as well, which I definitely did not know about. And one of the things that I know at Western is sometimes they'll offer you a spot in the PhD stream to make sure that you're going to be able to survive the dual degree. I say survive, as long as you're going to be successful at the dual degree stream. So like, you know, just as I had a friend who transferred into it as well. So yeah, if anybody has any questions about it, I'm happy to like chat some more or, you know, answer questions as they come up. I think you guys have my email. So
yeah, for sure. I can actually write your email here in the chat if that's all right.
Yeah. I can do it actually if you want.
Okay, yeah, that works. That's even better.
Spelled it right. The only thing, you go through 3 schools, you got 3 different emails now.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so if anyone has any outstanding questions or think of something later, Jill is super kind and willing to reach out and answer us. So yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you again, and I hope everyone has a good weekend.
Yeah, you guys as well. Sorry, thanks for sticking around on a Friday. I forget that people have lives.
Oh, no worries. School's our life right now.